season 4 in like a really long time.
After a really long time, Rick and Morty Season 4 is here, but I think I need a refresher. How did the last season end again?
Minecraft.
Minecraft.
Is this game popular with autistic people?
Why would you say something like that?
Because I'm starting to love it.
Oh yeah! I won't act like the prior seasons didn't have their fair share of stinkers, but watching Season 3 of Rick and Morty as it originally aired was one of the worst experiences I've had watching a season of television. I came into every episode with optimism, and week after week, I was disappointed. I can't say that I hated it though, and my opinion has definitely softened over the past 2 years. The problems with this season go beyond a few mediocre episodes. They extend to the staff behind the scenes, as well as problems the show has had for years. And that's without even mentioning him. What's up, gamers? I'm Pickle Nick! Good morning, YouTube!
Just killed him.
Yeah, we just killed him. He's dead. So
You just witnessed a murder!
I thought that joke was dead.
well, maybe your IQ isn't high enough to understand
I
it.
thought that joke was dead too.
Silence, stand in for what my audience may or may not be saying. We begin with Earth having been taken over by the Galactic Federation and Rick imprisoned with no escape in sight. And that's all undone by the next episode. Normally, this would be an instant red flag. There's enough potential behind this cliffhanger for an entire arc about Rick escaping from and subsequently dismantling the Galactic Federation. There isn't even much exploration of Rick's life in prison or how life on Earth is now like. Instead, the plot centers around callbacks to Rick Potion number 9, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, and M. Night Shyamalan's. That last one's not a callback though. They just stole its plot twist about Rick fabricating code in a simulation to escape it. I suppose this plot recycling can be forgiven, as the twist is a much smaller part of this episode, instead of the resolution to its central plot twist. The fake origin story Rick creates to fool Federation agent Cornelius Daniel is a clever screw-the-audience joke in its own right, and in universe, it only makes sense for Rick to use the same trick twice. The slower pace of the simulation subplot contrasts with the chaos around it, and has some solid gags, including Rick's bit about wanting to revisit his memory of an old McDonald's promotion for a Szechuan sauce. The writers admit that they didn't intend to cause enough uproar to bring the sauce back into circulation, and had no part in McDonald's stunt to distribute it for one day only in dangerously small quantities. While it's become ingrained in the culture around the show to the point of becoming, like, completely obnoxious, the original joke itself works for being so particular and coming in at the silliest possible moment.
Wow, this sauce is f***ing amazing. You said it was promoting a movie?
Rick barely struggles in this episode. He isn't given a challenge that he can't handle, and almost single-handedly completes all of his goals. It's rather convenient, but it gives the episode great momentum. There's always action, quite a few twists or turns, and Rick being an unstoppable force complements Morty's arc, where he tries to convince Summer about the dangers of trusting their grandfather.
If you think my Rick's dead, he's alive, and if you think you're safe, he's coming for you!
The plot concludes a bit too neatly despite having an intergalactic scale, even with the resolution hinging on an anticlimax. To the episode's credit, despite things pretty much returning back to normal, there's a massive status quo change. Beth and Jerry finally decide to get a divorce. The constant ups and downs of this couple got old quick, and from their inception, these two were always meant to be simple characters created to flesh out the stories and world. While Summer usually found a place within Rick and Morty's sci-fi escapades, there was rarely anything beyond a one-note B-plot to come from Beth and Jerry.
Jesus Christ! Will you fix your marriage or get a divorce already?
Separating the unhappy couple sounds like a great way to try and turn these characters around, since as early as the start of Season 2, you can tell that even the writers were getting sick of their contributions to the story.
Your parents get to exist. They're probably living it up in some pointless grounded story about their marriage.
The Rick Shank Rick-demption could have been a much different episode given what it had to work with, but the final product is such a satisfying ride, both comedy-wise and character-wise. The only negative I can muster up now is that the cliffhanger in the after-credits scene has no payoff in the rest of the season. But if the evil Morty storyline is anything to go by, the writers like to play the long game. So as long as it's brought up again, it's fine for now. I can't even be disappointed in what could have been when it's painfully obvious that the writers had no clear plans for how to wrap up what they set up at the end of the last season.
Tune in to Rick and Morty Season 3 in like a year and a half or longer to see how we unravel this mess. Ooh-wee!
The way that this episode brings a few arcs to an end and references the end of the pilot, it feels as if it could have been a decent series finale. And a part of me feels like maybe it should have been. A lot of my initial thoughts on these episodes could be summed up by simply saying that they weren't very funny. That remains true for Rick Mansing the Stone. It's got its sights set on story, and showing the different ways Morty and Summer deal with the emotional baggage of their parents' divorce against the backdrop of a desert apocalypse. The premise is fine, even if it reeks of being conceived right after Mad Max Fury Road had just come out. But there just isn't too much going on. Summer's storyline doesn't work for me because I can't figure out what they were trying to go for with her sudden love interest, Hemorrhage. I think he's supposed to be a Jerry stand-in due to how the layers of his facade are pulled back over time until he becomes Summer's lazy husband. I suppose it's kind of the opposite of Jerry's transformation into an unstoppable warrior in Rick Potion number 9, but only 2 full scenes are dedicated to just him and Summer interacting here, so the character of Hemorrhage doesn't have enough time to come together. I can't say that I'll be buying his Funko Pop anytime soon. Morty's subplot trumps Summer's, since the metaphor is simple and has a much better sense of progression. Neither plot is particularly hilarious, because the episode also tries to squeeze in scenes of Jerry being Jerry and Rick covering for his kids with robot duplicates. These are funny enough, but they should have been cut from this episode. Most of the comedy amounts to character quips because there isn't much room for anything else. I don't think there were any truly bad ideas behind this episode, but it reeks of needing just one more draft to be polished up. Also, it's not a great sign that the plot has a twist that the show basically made fun of 3 episodes prior.
Fade to black. Title: 3 weeks earlier.
Oh jeez. Oh, I have to record the Pickle Rick segment. Oh my god. How did I not remember this was the 3rd episode? Why am I surprised that I have to record this? Oh boy, it's time to talk about Funny Pickle Rick episode! I hope he didn't experience any delays getting over here. I don't think he's usually associated with those. I've made my distaste for this episode very clear in the past, and I don't think my opinion on it has changed much recently. The A and B stories are meant to balance each other out, but they push their goals to the worst possible extremes. Rick rebuilding his body and killing everything in sight as a pickle is an absurdly funny concept. A concept that the episode runs straight into the ground by making the gory violence on display the only source of entertainment from the storyline. I guess there is the joke of Rick's new catchphrase. You know, the one that's identical to a catchphrase from season 2.
I'm Pickle Rick! Tiny Rick!
The action is rendered and staged in a disgustingly high-quality way, but by the time Rick ends up in this random Russian agency, and the plot switches gears to become a parody of John Wick, I've already lost interest. Previously, we've seen Rick succeed when going up against impossible odds, both in this episode and numerous others before it. So why should I care now, when he goes up against characters built around action movie cliches? Switching up the scenery doesn't up the stakes, it causes them to stagnate. And from this point on, you could cut the A story short, and the conclusion wouldn't change a bit. It's all style. So for substance, you have to look to the B plot. The downside is that you get nothing but substance. The psychologist that conducts the family's therapy annoys the characters and audience on an equal level. She isn't a character, but a plot device, whose only purpose is to convey the message of the episode to the audience. Her presence is void of any personality, and the standard storyboarding does the sequence no favors. Just because this B story is supposed to be a cooldown doesn't mean that it has to be boring. So much time in this episode feels wasted, whether it be 15 seconds where Rick does nothing but make noises, or seemingly endless monologues. One lasts so long that you can hear a clear audio cut towards the end. It feels like an ad-lib that they had to rewrite at the last minute, but they didn't bother re-recording the entire line.
My access to infinite timelines precludes the necessity of attachment. In fact, I even abandoned one of my infinite daughters in an alternate version of Earth that was taken over by mutants.
The psychologist's diatribe can be summed up with basically a 13-second clip, but her speech is more than 5 times that length, amounting to about a full minute of hammering in an already obvious point about Rick's mental issues.
You seem to alternate between viewing your own mind as an unstoppable force and as an inescapable curse. And I think it's because the only truly unapproachable concept for you is that it's your mind within your control.
Nothing that she says has any impression on Rick, which paints all of the episode as being pointless in the end. The way that Pickle Rick conveys its story has so many fundamental flaws I can't look past, even if it was meant to be a farce. They're flaws that may not be clear at first, or flaws that everyone will agree with me on. And that's okay. This just remains one of the most frustrating episodes that I've had to talk about on this channel, so I definitely think it still deserves the infamous status that it has around here. Looks like he's disappointed me yet again. Vindicators 3 has everything going for it conceptually, but it's brought down by simple issues that make the whole episode feel like a waste of time. There's a lot of potential in Rick and Morty teaming up with a group of one-note superheroes, especially with the indication that they've gone on or have been left out of previous team-ups. Flipping this setting on its head by having a drunk Rick turn the conflict into a parody of Saw is also a fun idea. I especially like how Morty instinctively treats Rick like a completely separate person. Like he spent enough time with his grandpa intoxicated that he practically knows every move that drunk Rick will make.
Morty, how many of these?
Too many, Rick! Too many!
Rick's beef with the Vindicators is that they're all boring superhero stereotypes, and he's completely correct. They feel like characters from an 80s cartoon made to sell toys, which they probably were in some way. They're all designed well, but when they die, I don't care. So dedicating most of the episode to killing them off one by one isn't compelling to watch. The plot developments within the group are predictable, occasionally forced, and barely even involve Rick and Morty themselves. Besides drunk Rick acting as a pre-recorded antagonist, the main characters play passive roles in the story. I suppose that Morty learns not to idolize his heroes, but the message seems to be more about how Rick ruins everything, including the ending of this very episode. The conflict between the duo and, what was her name? Oh yeah, Supernova, fizzles out so that we can see Logic dab and rap about all the dead characters who I still don't care about. They lampshade this by bringing up how blurred the line is between Rick's friends and enemies, but it doesn't make this final scene any more conclusive, especially because it comes straight out of nowhere.
Look at that. Jeez, I must have planned a whole party. Invited a bunch of people. Not bad, drunk Rick. Not bad.
A good premise is not enough to salvage how boring and unsatisfying most of Vindicators 3 is. The standout joke from this episode is a Mr. Poopy Butthole knockoff saying a funny swear. There really isn't much worth remembering from this one. This isn't a jab at any other episode, but of the past 4 that we've looked at so far, this one feels the most Rick and Morty. That quality lies in the plotting and setting. Both plot lines have solid sci-fi hooks, or settings that include more dark and weird jokes, and less excessive violence. Okay, there's still some excessive violence, but my point is that the writing itself feels a little stronger, which helps when a few elements are a little lacking. Rick and Jerry's story is great up until Rick is basically neutered at a spaceport security check. It's a cheap way to bring Rick down a peg and create some suspense for a brief moment. The trippy wormhole sequence that follows looks great, and there's no doubt about that, but it doesn't have much of a point to it. It's here to be weird and random, because that's all it believes it needs to be for the episode to be entertaining. The B story with the rest of the Smith family is good, but Beth's actions are so annoyingly rash. She either selfishly ignores her daughter, or makes the whole situation worse. It's clear that Beth learns her lesson, but this does nothing to make me like her character more. She is quite irritating throughout most of this subplot.
Like you want to prove yourself?
Oh, it's not about anything, Morty. How dare you?
Okay, good, then I'll just call. Ow!
Morty, I need this.
No wonder Morty is so fed up with his mom. I really like how in this season, he's more assertive than usual. I may have focused on the negatives when critiquing this one, but the Whirly-Durly conspiracy is still a solid episode. It really hammers in the flaws of its characters, but the stories it has to tell have strong development and feel complete. And at this point, I'll take it. Structurally, Rest and Reclaxation is the most straightforward episode. The cold open sets the mood well, as it's a simple joke told in a really effective way. Although I think that's the only laugh-out-loud scene here, the rest is also executed quite well. Rick and Morty's toxic traits gaining lives of their own is an idea with a great setup and reveal, and I like how much the episode embraces the idea that this is all that's holding Morty back from doing pretty much anything. I think it could have gone a little zanier with the degree of success that Morty can now achieve, and Rick is unsatisfyingly absent from most of Act 1. I'll give credit to actually giving some character development to Jessica, finally making her a little more than just someone for Morty to creepily obsess over. The resolution is the weakest link of this story. Having Rick face himself leads to an outstandingly odd climax, but the realization that cleansed Rick no longer has affection for Morty comes out of nowhere. It makes sense for Rick's character, but a little foreshadowing would have helped it have a bigger impact. It's good to have an episode that's just fine, especially with how complicated the quality of the first half of the season has been. I don't think this episode is nearly as memorable as Whirly Durly despite having the better plotting, but it's a good breather before we dive into a loaded final stretch. The conceit of hiding a lore-heavy episode behind a seemingly mundane premise to throw off speculative fans is a move some might call genius. Tales from the Citadel is very well crafted. It's nothing but world building through variations of the same two characters, but it leaves no stone unturned, showing every nook and cranny of life in this reformed society through not only its four main stories, but little details that blend into the background.
Sick 'em, boy! I don't wear this dang-damn hat and commit to this rural character so you can eat for free while you come of age!
Like Rick Mansing the Stone, there's so much to develop and establish, so the comedy isn't the main priority. That's the main reason why I enjoy the Rick Shank redemption more than this, as I think it has the better balance of light and dark tones. But I won't blame you for thinking of this as the better episode. Many small gags are able to work their way into the intricacy of the Citadel itself, so what jokes are here feels somewhat natural. Each plot appears distinct and disconnected, but they all naturally tie into the winds of change sweeping over the Citadel as the established relationship between Rick's and Morty's is deconstructed through their shifting power dynamics. The ending is beautifully psychotic, as when the main twist is revealed to the audience, it's already too late. The final shot encapsulates a bleak future for this society by panning across so many of the characters we've just seen glimpses of over the past 22 minutes, including Trenchcoat Rick, may he rest in peace.
What's this? It's secrets. What do you think it is? Look at how I'm dressed.
I didn't think Interdimensional Cable 2 really held a candle to the original, mostly due to a dreadful Jerry subplot, so I think completely getting away from that format in favor of something new was a good call, or at least it ended up being a good call because I thought this was great. I believe the biggest advantage this anthology has over its predecessor is that the skits actually involve the show's characters. It's easier to get invested when we're familiar with the subjects, and they are all far more complex and compelling than Justin Roiland doing improv for half an episode. Besides one based around a drawn-out gross-out bit, which just combines two terrible comedy tropes, there's no other memory of Morty's that I disliked. I like the variety and length of the sequences, although the lack of set theming feels like a missed opportunity, even if Rick himself points this out.
So if the blue ones are my fault and the purple ones are my family's, what are the red ones?
Yeah, don't read into it, Morty.
At the end of the day, the only aspect of Morty's mind blowers that prevents me from thinking of it more highly are the wraparounds. There's barely anything to the subplot of the duo revisiting Morty's memories and then losing both of their own. Because it goes in such an obvious direction, it doesn't feel like a worthy addition to the story, and more like a requirement to help the episode stay grounded. I think the crew would have been better off structuring the episode like Total Recall, where the flashbacks actually push a mystery forward, rather than just a somewhat static setup. If they decide to revisit this anthology and not do another Interdimensional Cable in Season 4, I'll be content. I personally think having a different theme for the anthology format every season would be a great trend to continue. But all that aside, Morty's Mind Blowers is proof that not every decision in this season to switch things up was a bad one. Both plots of the ABCs of Beth struggle to find greater relevance to the rest of the season, despite being its penultimate episode. Jerry getting in over his head by dating a violent warrior priestess is such a stock subplot. This is one of a few elements from this season that I can confidently call lazy. From the moment the situation is presented, it's obvious that Jerry isn't going to listen to his kids, and his new relationship is going to backfire. It plays out like a sitcom storyline with aliens, which sounds like Justin Roiland's upcoming Hulu show, but is an insult here.
Look, I'm a closeted racist, and I'm sexist, and selfish, and I dragged us all into my sexist, racist, bad things because I'm stupid.
Thank you.
Now you're gonna help me.
Forcing Jerry to mingle with sci-fi elements has worked before to varying degrees of success, but here they fall back on cliché relationship tropes, which stinks because this is the only time we explore his love life after the divorce. I do appreciate that Jerry at least acknowledged his mistakes, even if this is only the third and final time actual character growth happens in Season 3. This B story does a lot to make the episode dreadful to watch, which is a shame because the A story explores some neat concepts. although in all fairness, it doesn't really explore those concepts very well. It's interesting to learn that Beth had a strenuous relationship with her father during her childhood, forcing Rick to create loads of inventions that would act as a great basis for episodes of a Young Beth spin-off series. This is an interesting new angle on Rick and Beth's relationship, although I'm not as big of a fan of how it concludes. Beth realizes that she's been like her father all along, even though Morty already told her this 4 episodes prior. Wanting a chance to figure out who she is, Rick offers to make a clone of Beth that can live out her life for her while she quote-unquote takes off. The ending leaves it up in the air as to whether or not Beth is now a clone, but I don't really think this mystery was set up in the best way that it could have been.
The moment you decide to come back, I flip a switch, and the clone's job is done. It feels no pain, regrets nothing, and has 0 chance of going Blade Runner.
To me, it doesn't seem to matter what decision Beth made. It sounds like her family won't be worse off if she leaves, and she doesn't have a clear goal motivating her to go off on her own. If Rick mentioned that Beth would never be able to see her family again if she left, or just clarified the greater ramifications of her choice, then I could buy this being a big decision for Beth instead of being a little underwhelmed. The ABCs of Beth is a little confused and a little bit of a retread. Making this mess more mediocre is the dialogue. I hate most of it. 2016 called. They want their overused topical references back.
Fake news.
The Rick-Chury and Morty date tries to tell its own story while also concluding the previous episode, while also concluding the season as a whole. Consider this a deal, because we get 2 disappointing adventures for the price of 1. The main focus is a feud between Rick and the President of the United States, because the latter is suddenly a power-hungry jerk who treats all of his resources as expendable. I don't know why they took the character in this direction, especially considering that in his previous experience, he was a pretty chill dude, and it was the General who was untrustful of Rick and Morty. Here, the President is continuously stubborn and Rick is unstoppable. Even though I like the unique locations and weapons included in the fight between the two, the drama behind the conflict never goes beyond shallow threats and fistfights, and it stops being important when the episode remembers that it's a season finale. I hope the question of whether or not Beth was a clone didn't keep you up at night, because Rick point blank tells her that she's not a clone multiple times. Unless the creators pull some plot twist out of thin air later down the line, the arc ends here with a simple clarification. That's weird enough with how much emphasis the last episode placed on this plot point, but to make matters worse, this revelation is what brings Beth and Jerry back together. They rekindle their love in one scene, undoing a divorce that had been built up for 2 whole seasons. It's never really explained why confusion over her identity leads Beth to completely forget all that happened during her marriage. It just seems like a very forced way to bring everything back to the status quo. The bulk of the Rick-Chury and Morty date is pretty decent writing-wise, but it rushes through important developments to tie up the season. Its flaws are in part because of production issues that the season faced. Season 3 was slated to be 14 episodes long, but that number was cut down to only 10. This meant that the Rick-Chury and Morty date had to be turned into a finale at the last minute, which explains why it suddenly switches gears with only 5 minutes left in its runtime. For the writing staff, the pressure was on to make this the best season yet, after the show's popularity had quickly exploded. Co-creator Dan Harmon blamed his infamous perfectionism, and the process took longer than most TV productions because when a change was made, both the writing and animation needed to be revised. If you listen to the commentary tracks for this season, you'll learn that a ton of work on it was done during editing or at the 11th hour. The large number of revisions and rewrites may explain why the season was filled with so many unclear story ideas and monologues, since that is one of the easiest ways for a writer to convey an idea. After hitting dead ends with numerous drafts, that may have ended up being the best option. It's worth noting that as far as I know, Season 3 also saw the departure of 2 credited writers who had been with the show since the start. 4 new writers took their place, all of which were female. Now, gender aside, having half of your staff consist of new writers who aren't as familiar with the show is not a great sign. I don't want to call anyone out here, but they were directly credited for 2 of my least favorite episodes of the season. I'm not going to pretend like the new writers were the only ones to blame for the season being the way that it was, as the returning staff also had their fair share of middling episodes attributed to their names. Due to each story being first conceived in a writer's room and then handed off to a separate writer, it's hard to point fingers and figure out who was responsible for what. Not that I want to point fingers anyway. I'd rather use my fingers to finish off this review, because if I don't, I feel like I'm going to end up getting carpal tunnel syndrome. The background insight we have on this season does offer an explanation as to why I feel like the identity of the show had been lost from time to time. There was an excessive amount of violence, forced randomness and a lack of consistency in the storytelling that appears to unnaturally imitate the spirit of Rick and Morty. With all that I've said in mind, I don't think that Season 3 was completely misguided. It gave life to 3 of my favorite episodes of the series, continued to up the ante with the animation, acting, and art, and took a risk by attempting a season-long arc. Outside of John Wickle Rick and the episode with a montage song about doo-doo butts, there was also less humor that appealed to the lowest common denominator. All of the merchandise pumped out of that season did that for them. Nevertheless, it doesn't seem like the crew realized that character development was needed to move their arc forward, so the growth of the cast either stagnated or was unrelated to the main story that they wanted to tell. Splitting up Beth and Jerry did nothing to give them a purpose or make them less irritating. Instead of being relegated to B stories, their influence covers the entire season. It almost feels like a joke in how the quality diminished the more focus they received. Even being far removed from the hype that surrounded the fandom when it released in 2017, I still find Season 3 of Rick and Morty quite disappointing. It wasn't consistent enough to be more than mediocre or ruin the show as a whole, so I suppose I'll keep watching, so long as the quality doesn't sink this low again. I remember that when I wanted to do this review 2 years ago, I couldn't bring myself to rewatch past the first episode. It's ironic that my analysis of this season was just as delayed as the season itself. Speaking of delays, Pickle Nick hasn't shown up yet. I guess he might really be gone after all. I suppose this brings his arc to an overall unsatisfying conclusion, but that's okay. That's not enough to ruin the memories that we share together. Besides, he ruined those memories on his own. The future might not look the best for him, but I think it's best to remain optimistic, just as I am for this new season of Rick and Morty. Hopefully the growing pains seen during this last batch of 10 episodes were only short-term, and an overall more experienced staff is now prepared to tackle the next 70 episodes? It's an Adult Swim show. No surprise that they want to milk it for all it's worth. That news probably made someone extremely happy somewhere.